Hey, welcome back to another episode of Wake Up and Ship More. I am your host, Joe, and this is a show where we talk about software development, productivity, entrepreneurship, all those different things. We have a really fun episode today. So if you've been following along and you've joined us previously, so we've talked a lot about building an MVP. We talked about some app architecture stuff, just kind of planning out, how to get started, as working as a solo dev, things like that. So today we're going to do something kind of fun. And we have a smaller audience still, but there's been a lot of different topics. So what I did was one of my favorite things to do for anything or listen to on other shows also is always the kind of mailbag where you're out there and users kind of send in listeners, viewers, they send in their questions, things like that, and you can kind of go through all of those. Not really like an AMA, just more about just different questions about whatever topic. So what I did is I kind of mixed up a little bit, and I took all the transcripts from the first 5 episodes, and I put them into 2 different AI systems, and I had them put together a set of questions. And so we're going to do those questions. So our mailbag today is actually going to be AI driven, and then we'll just kind of see how that goes. So I use both ChatGPT and Claude. I'll make sure I identify which question comes from which, but I thought this would be a fun way to kind of recap what we've talked about so far. There's been a lot of information and things like that so far as well. I wanted to make sure we kind of follow back that up. If you haven't joined the Telegram group, I would suggest that you do so, just because there's different updates there. We also have a nice spot where you can ask questions, and if you watch these on replay, so if you're not watching live but you're watching the replay, it's a great place to go, and you can ask questions there as well. So definitely check that out. You can still always ask questions here as well during the episode. Comment whatever stream you're watching, whether it's Twitch or X, YouTube, whatever it is. Put a question in the comments, and I will try to get to it. Cool. So let's jump into it. So the first thing that I had is so again, I'm going to identify what episode it was the question came out of. We're going to also then I'll say who it was, which AI system actually asked the question, and then I will answer the question. So let's go from there. All right. So episode 1, which was the maiden voyage, ChatGPT asked, how do you prioritize features when starting a new project? So that's an awesome question. And this is something that I tried to touch on a little bit during that initial call. And I've kind of followed up a little bit previously as well. So, when I think about the priority, right? So what becomes my priority? And when I talked about it before, the emphasis always is what is, so you have a larger, when you have a project, you say, oh, I have this big vision. Okay. And so I want to do all these different things. But when it comes to actually building, I have to be much more specific, and I have to really be conscious, because I'm trying to first get to some kind of MVP. Okay? And we'll talk probably more about that. I'm pretty sure there's some questions in here about MVP stuff, so we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But here, if I have my priority and I'm trying to say, okay, how do I get to here, right? So then it becomes what are my key features, right? And so, let's use a really simple example, right? If I have a to-do app, and, what is the key feature of my to-do app? Well, I have to be able to actually add and check off to-dos. And so those are my key features. And so once I know, what my key features are, then I can start to prioritize what that is. Then you start to go through and you probably have a next category of like nice to haves. And nice to haves are, again, just what they sound like. Of, hey, this is a nice thing to have. It's not critical to my application working. It just is a cool thing, right? And so, okay, great. Well, maybe improve.
Get connected to Wi-Fi.
Oh, there's Alexa. See, they're all over the place here. We're being invaded by AI over here. So, but this is one of the cool things here, I think, of when you are trying to plan a project for the first time, is really trying to understand, like, what is my priority, and like what are the things that are going to enhance the user experience, right? So that's where I like to start. Also, part of this too is that I need to prioritize again of like, what is my first goal? So again, if I want to get this an MVP that's working for users, right? So my MVP isn't like an investor piece. It's not to just gain feedback if this is a usable idea, if this is a realistic idea. If my priority for my MVP is, I want actually users taking time with my product, then my features need to be able to actually allow my users to do that. So that's how you start to prioritize. And anytime you have any kind of idea, you have to think of the simplest thing first. I'll also say, one of the best things I ever heard when it comes to product and thinking about like starting a new product was an interview with the founders from Instagram. And they were talking about part of where they found success early on was that like Instagram was if you remember the beginnings of Instagram, okay, it was first called like Bourbon and then became Instagram. It was like super focused on like just being a way to add filters to photos. Like they wanted to be able to have this feed of like really nice looking photos. And it really was about having like these filters. And so that was like what they focused. It was not a social network necessarily to begin with. It was really just focused on the photo taking. So like that was the key feature. So that was the priority of like, hey, can we ship the best thing with like this, right? Can this be the best thing for us, of the photos and, photo filters and everything else. From there, it then started to expand out and become something more, and eventually became a social network and everything else. So that's something to consider. All right. Good question, ChatGPT. Next one. Oh, for episode 2. This is from Cloud. So Claude says, can you share some insights on how to effectively communicate technical blockchain concepts to non-technical stakeholders or team members? Good question. And I will also say here, this doesn't even, my answer is not going to just apply to, blockchain necessarily. I think anytime you're trying to speak technically to your non-technical stakeholders or team members, there is really some important aspects here that I think are relevant to any product building period, whether you're at the starting point or whether you're like in an enterprise and you are working on some big behemoth of a project. So let's talk about this a little bit here. So here we are. So let me pull up. Right. So how am I going to talk to my non-technical team members? Well, some things that I found that brought me success, in the past, especially when you have people in roles that are very important to your business, but they don't really have a need to be technical. It's not that they just aren't technical, like they just don't really have a need to be overly technical because it's not their role. So here, the example might be, and this happens all the time, that I think where people make mistakes is like as you start to grow and you have a marketing and sales team and everything else, they're not going to always necessarily be very technical, especially if you have a product that is very technical, right? So that's important that they are looped in a way that they understand what you're building and what's going on, how new features work, without it becoming too big of a concept for them, right? So the way that I used to, especially like in an enterprise, try to break things out, like I had a new feature and you want to present it to the sales team, is really about like, so I would take the new features and I would say, okay, like here's a bucket of new features, right? Inside my bucket of new features. And I would say like, what do they do? Okay. Why do they do it? Okay. And like who benefits or who's getting value out of this? Like what user type, whatever else. What I don't ever talk about is the how. Okay. It's not relevant. And that's where you get excited, right? You're a developer, and like you're super excited that like, hey, I built this really cool thing. You understand why it's neat or the implementation is unique or, you solve some kind of problem. It doesn't matter. It's a little bit where it's like you kind of have to leave some of your ego at the door and just talk about like, what is this feature doing? So I have my feature in here, right? So okay, here's my feature box. And I'm just talking about like, what does it do? And if it's too complicated, right? So like if it's this really like nuanced, complicated thing, well, then maybe I don't even have to explain like what it actually is. Okay. Maybe instead, because the user isn't, whoever I'm selling this to or whoever the user is, they're not even actually really fully, maybe interfacing with that new feature. Maybe it's just like the outcome, right? So like maybe the outcome is simply like, hey, the app loads like 3 times faster. Like it doesn't matter how I did it. It doesn't matter like what was done in the background or what that feature. It's simply like, hey, here's the outcome, right? Like, hey, we just did 3x faster load times. Like that's cool. Like great. Like that's helpful. The sales team can do whatever they want with that. Marketing can show that off. And that's all they need to know. That's all that's relevant. So you really have to like take a step back from the technical side of it and be like, look, I get that it's cool whatever you did to make it 3 times faster. And, there probably was a lot of work to make something feel so simple and easy, but it doesn't matter to those non-technical people. Like it matters that you were successful. It doesn't matter per se of like how you actually did it, and it may just go over their head and cause more confusion. So that's something that we really want to be careful of how we do that. The other thing is analogies is a really great way of going about this. So if you can compare something to something else, something that they know, especially in the tech space. I think this got a little out of hand a few years back when startups would come in and be like, we're the, like Uber of this or the Airbnb of that. And like that's too general because now like you're just taking some giant other app and you're trying to apply it to something niche. Like that's not really helpful. But when you do take something like that, take an analogy and you say, you know how this can do that, and you start to compare things to other features that maybe they're used to, that starts to paint that picture for them. Also, not in this episode 2, but in more recent episodes around like flowcharts, being able to show that flowchart is like super helpful as well, because that's something where you can show like, hey, this is now how this app works. We've added in this feature. I want you to be able to see the change in like process for the user, not process for like your backend infrastructure, because again, the marketing team doesn't need to know that, sales team doesn't need to know that, but like what does the user then start to have in there. All right, let's take another question here. All right, so this is from ChatGPT. This is from episode 4, more MVP talk. ChatGPT asked, how do you engage with the community to build a supportive user base during the early stages of a project? I mean, come on, man. This is a hard This is a hard question. Like, I think this is something that has, people have a lot of opinions on. I don't think anyone's really solved. I wouldn't say like there's an answer, one particular answer for this. Uh, Look, what I've seen happen that's I think been successful is, bringing the community into the building of the product. Uh, Anytime that you can kind of build out in the open, and by building in the open, it doesn't mean you have to like open source everything. It doesn't mean that you have to share all the ups and downs. You don't have to share all of the negatives. And I get like sometimes sharing some of the negatives are good because it's a learning experience for other people. But like, there's some, use some discretion there. But when you bring the users into the process of, hey, here's a new feature, what do you think? And like you're actively going to them and taking their feedback. And then if you can not only take their feedback, but then from taking their feedback, go and actually implement some of that and highlight that you took user feedback, it starts to empower that community because they know that like you're listening, and they know that if they do provide feedback, that you are going to listen, you're going to take it in, and maybe it becomes part of the app. And now, as they are helping drive your product, they feel more ownership to it as well because they're now part of something, right? So that's where I really like the idea here of, if I'm building in public, I can pull all of this together where my community feels as much ownership as possible to what's happening. From there, you then hope that, that you're also like shipping stuff that frankly works, because it's really easy to lose that early user base by just like shipping, I don't want to say bad product, but like just product that doesn't work correctly, doesn't work at all, whatever it might be, it's too buggy. You're going to lose people. And that's okay sometimes. Like things are going to happen. Like you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to ship, top code all of the time. But it's important that then if you do make a mistake, that you're open and upfront about it. That you solicit feedback from the community. That you make sure that they understand that you know the value of that user base. Because the reality of it is, I don't care how cool of a product you build, it can look amazing, it can do amazing things. If nobody's using it, it's not valuable, right? So like you have to, if you're trying to make value, trying to build a business, you're trying to garner investment, or you're just trying to make sure that you feel like your product is worth something, like you need to have users. People have to be using it. And so if they feel alienated, if they feel like they're not being listened to, that's a big part of it. I would say how you engage is a lot of different methods. If you were just kind of like anonymous behind, like survey forms, that's not going to work. In current times, I think, sharing some of your process and your feedback on social media, whether it's through videos, through posts, things like that, actively engaging with the community, through some of those socials. So if they have questions, if something comes up and they comment back, and you making sure that you are replying. I also really like the idea of not just hiding behind a brand. So you want to promote your brand, right? So you probably want to have a brand. So I'll give an example for myself. So my project now that I'm working on, ShardDog, we have a brand, right? So we have like a ShardDog account for a lot of different things. Sometimes when things come up, like we reply as that account, or we interact as that account. But also a lot of times, my co-founder Jared and I, we will reply and we will, respond and give feedback or ask questions or provide support as ourselves. And I think that is like super critical to have a face behind who's actually doing this, because that personal connection of like, oh, this is a person, this is somebody who's actively working, on this. And one, sometimes it tempers a little bit of like, if people are going to be rude and inconsiderate, sometimes knowing that sometimes doesn't help. But even just, again, for like just feedback in general, it's really nice to be able to like have that connection. Because like what I found is that when you are in that scenario, and then you maybe have like the privilege of being able to go to like a conference, and you run into somebody who maybe interacted with your product, and they recognize that like, oh yeah, you're that person who built that. And now like that conversation, that feedback is just so different. It's just a different experience versus where like if it's just this anonymous account, like it doesn't feel like anything. And then I think also too, now in the age of AI and bots and everything else, it's just nice to have a little bit more human connection around that. So nice. All right, which one of these AI services is next? Oh, here we go, Claude again. All right, so this is from episode 3, the MVP episode. Look at this. This is suspect here. Claude's asking, what are your thoughts on the role of AI in blockchain development? I don't know if AI is listening. I'm not sure if I appreciate that. No, I'm just kidding. So look, this is, an episode that is running, as part of Near DevHub. Near Protocol is working on AI on the blockchain. So I think that is certainly fairly relevant here. I think part of this too is that this is actually, though, asking something more about like, how do you build using AI? This is tricky, and I think if you asked me 6 months ago and then you asked me 6 months from now, I think my answers are going to be completely different than it is today, just because things are changing so quickly. 6 months ago or so, I would have said, look, this, a lot of the stuff that the code is being produced is not really great, depending on the chain, because the information that's in these current LLMs is mixed, so wasn't really great. It's gotten considerably better. So being able to help yourself build, whether it's a smart contract or front ends or things like that, using AI has drastically improved, but it's still not perfect. And where I think it really fits in well here is that I'm starting to see, and again, this is not perfect. Like there is still some really bad, vulnerable code. And this is not, I'm going to caveat this with, these AI systems are not a replacement for a full audit, especially if you're doing financial transactions. So like that's flat out. These are not replacements for auditors. But what they can be is a way for you to, more quickly get up and running and actually have that MVP. So I think this question came out of this episode because, we talked a little bit about, some examples of like, I think we would do like NFT minting or something like that. And, again, for myself here, thinking about like, if I have an idea that's going to integrate any technology, not just blockchain, being able to use these AI services, like Claude, if that's why they're asking, I don't know. Or if like, any of these different ones here to help me speed up some development for my MVP, I think it's worthwhile. Like that's something that is like relevant to your process, and kind of like a tangent here. Like this is part of the concern I think people are having of like, look, a lot of the stuff that maybe you would assign to a junior developer now probably is going to an AI system, right? To the concept of like prototyping and doing some of these, early MVPs that can go to an AI system. And so it's cutting out some work from other people. But if you are a solo dev, if you are a small team, being able to leverage some of this stuff to rapidly prototype, to get an MVP out faster, to be able to maybe do something that would have taken you maybe months now can take you days or weeks. That's a huge advantage, especially when maybe you have a short runway or you're bootstrapping and you have no money, whatever it might be. That's relevant. I also think for something like a new technology, and I say new, like I'm gonna put like giant air quotes, like new technology of like blockchain. Like blockchain's been around for a while, obviously, but it's still in its early stages of product development by the fact that there are limited like products besides like DeFi and meme coins, and there's very limited products that are leveraging blockchain fully. So while that's still in that early stages, it's nice to be able to have systems that can again aid in some of that development for you and kind of again get the ball rolling. Where I think you still have to be careful, and again this is where maybe again my answer might change in 6 months from now, is that there's just a lot of information missing in these LLMs, and like things are changing rapidly on some blockchains, and so something that is maybe in a system now that would spit out some code for you might already be outdated. So you really have to be careful of that. So I just think, again, this is less about blockchain and more about just like technology and getting started, that AI can really boost, like what's actually happening there. So great question, AI. Let's go to another one here. All right, what do we got? ChatGPT from episode 5, Feeling the Flow. So we talked about flowcharts. This one. ChatGPT asked, how do you decide whether to use an existing service like Mintbase versus building your own infrastructure? I mean, excellent question, AI. This is something that actually I have actually had asked to me, not let's say related to the show, but just in other times, of like where do you start to get this? And this is a tough decision. So let's do a new sheet. Let's just save this area here. Okay. So one of the things that we start to look at is I need to start to understand like what my actual infrastructure is. So again, the example we used in part of this is maybe I'm going to have my front end, okay, and then I'm going to have a back end here, and my back end might be like let's say like a database. It might need, let's say if I'm working with like blockchain, it might need to have some kind of RPC, maybe an indexer, different hardware might have to be in here, right? So like, do I have to have an actual like server or whatever that might be? And so now like all of this stuff, if I say like, well, how many different pieces of infrastructure do I need to have, becomes relevant, because when I am I'm a small team, right? I'm a solo dev or small team. The challenge instantly becomes like, how much extra work does me adding another server or other service, on my own, like running it as my own stack, add? The trade-off becomes like, what am I then tied to by using this other service? And tied to can be a couple different things. So when I am tied to something, it can be, yes, obviously, like if the service goes down, right? So like, if my service goes down, I can't do that. But it could also be money, right? So some of these services obviously are pay services. And so if that is the issue here, where I am now tied to a particular monthly cost, that's a consideration as well. So part of this here is I need to think through, what are my different trade-offs? The other part of this is, again, where am I in my product? Okay. And I think this makes a huge difference. If I am in early stages, okay, yeah, I am, whether MVP or I have a smaller user base, I really want to look at maximize what's important to me. And here's what might be important. If I am building, let's say, a mobile app, okay, that's going to, doesn't matter what it's doing, I'm building a mobile app, okay, and I need to have these different data sources. So I need to have that. Um, so for example, here, I'll pull this up, right? So just to emphasize some of this stuff here, right? So if I'm building a mobile app, okay, so here's my mobile app, right? And then from here, I'm then going to, I need to have a database. I need to have this API system that's obviously going to talk to the database. It's also going to go out externally and get stuff. Maybe I am working on chains, so I need to have like a RPC that's somewhere too, or an indexer or whatever that maybe is going to be there. Okay. But my focus here is this, right? Because I want to focus on like the features here. Because this is all just this, whatever this infrastructure is, all it is data. Okay, that's all it is. It's just data. And so yes, it's important. It drives everything that's in my app. But the features that I have in here, right, that whatever that becomes, is really what I want to focus on. That's really where like my time and effort needs to go. So if that's the case, then I need to really focus on that part. So I don't want to have all my own infrastructure, because again, as soon as I have my own servers, as soon as I have my own anything, I am responsible to do that. If I am a team of 1 developer, if I am a team of 5 developers, okay, that's still a small team. It gets interesting of like, where does that trade-off become? In a 3 to 5 man team, you may have a particular person who is really skilled at, running that infrastructure, and they can maybe have that as their job. And it would say, okay, great. What happens when that person wants to take a vacation? What happens when that person gets sick? Does that still fit into my team? It may not. And then cost-wise, what does it cost for me to have this one developer who can do this work and host my own stuff versus having some infrastructure? How much am I concerned about uptime? How much am I concerned about SLAs? Those are service level agreements, and SLAs are important because anytime you use a third-party service, you need to know what the expected uptime and response time and everything else is going to be if there is an issue. This happens, you're going to run into an issue where your app is reliant on a third-party service. You see it all the time. You see it even with big apps. Something goes down, right? Something's not working, and now, forget it. Like your app is down for, hours, and your users are mad at you, not that third party, not that outside thing. So I'm gonna end this question here with, you really need to have, I think this again. Here's the main considerations, right? And I think we can make it really simple. So we'll say time and resources, right? Like, like what do I have to, give up? What's my trade-off from hosting versus buying, or leasing, whatever it might be, or a SaaS model, and then financially. And then once you figure out those two things, then like the third thing becomes of like, we'll call it like availability, right? So how available is it, right? And and part of availability might be something where, again, actually my cost goes up, because maybe the free plan, the SLA is like, yeah, this might go down for a little bit, but we're not guaranteeing because you're not paying anything. But if you want some guarantees, you now have to pay. So just be aware of that when you are making these decisions as well. But the trade-off really becomes around time, resources, and money. And if you are short on time and resources, then you have to go the route of using existing services. I will also say things that are open sourced that are proven and working well, and that are not necessarily maybe full on infrastructure, but are maybe part of your feature set. That's always something to look at as well. Now, the reason why to maybe look at that is because you have something that you're not reinventing when you're building your own infrastructure. That would still fall in the category of having to host your own. So again, you still have to consider time, resources, and money. But your time is shorter because you're not like rebuilding something from scratch, like something that already kind of exists. So your time is maybe lessened. So then the determinating factor is just resources and money. So again, something to consider there too with open source. Okay. Let's see. We have a few more questions here. Okay. All right. Episode 4, more MVP talk. So again, we're talking about minimum viable products more. Claude asked, how do you approach security considerations in MVP, especially dealing with something like on-chain transactions or user data? What's the minimum viable security for a blockchain MVP? Okay. So again, I want to, again, these AI systems are really harping on blockchain. So look, I think this goes to anything. This is not a chain specific thing. I think blockchain becomes relevant because of like the financial piece of it, but you can have financial transactions in a non-blockchain app too. You have to, depending on what you're asking the user to do and what the MVP involves, determines your level of security you have to have. So if you are having people make financial transactions in your MVP that are significant for any party, just meaning that, like, could you lose a bunch of money? Could they lose a bunch of money? And that threshold will vary, but I mean, anything over a couple dollars, really, you really need to be considerate of that. You then need to take a security first approach for that, because you're dealing with people's, finances. You may be dealing with your own finances. You really need to be smart with that. And that becomes an attack vector for hackers, because they know it's a new product and maybe they can easily walk away with, maybe some easy money because you have nothing in place to stop them or even to identify them. Now, this also, I think, again, this applies for like a Web 2 thing too. Like, I'm putting in credit card information. I'm putting in user information. I'm putting in private information. Anything that's like private data. Okay, so if you are going to ask people for their address or their phone number, or anything that's considered non-public information, you really need to take a security first approach to your MVP. This will add time. This will add extra work. It maybe requires you to have extra resources, but it's important. It's critical, because nothing will sink your product faster than some kind of security incident early on, because you have immediately evaporated trust. Now, if you are not doing any of these things, if you are not saving or collecting any kind of personal information, if you are not doing any kind of financial transactions, security does need to come into there to some degree. I mean, you obviously don't want to just have your stuff all hacked and people are taking it over, but you can be a little bit, the best word I guess is like loose with it a little bit. I guess like you don't have to be so tight on it, because there's no sense of potential loss there. So that's where I do think it comes down to like, what is your product, right? Like what are you trying to do in your MVP? This and blockchain is not always necessarily a financial transaction. So again, like that varies like your mileage will vary around this too, of like, do I actually need to be a security first model? Once you graduate to out of the MVP to a, even if you call it like a versions like 0.1 kind of product and it's early on, you really should nowadays build security first in mind. I understand that like not everyone's a security expert. I understand that there a lot goes into different types of security stuff, but there's really easy best practices to follow. Tons of free courses online, tons of YouTube videos. I think it's worthwhile reviewing some of that. I am by no means a security expert. I am not a security engineer, nor do I ever want to claim that I am one, because I do not feel comfortable making those decisions. But I do know enough of like, where do I want to minimize vulnerabilities? Am I following some best, simple best coding practices to minimize some of this stuff? But again, my answer for here would be, anytime you are dealing with non-public information for the users and any kind of financial transaction, you really need to take security first approach in your MVP. All right, I think I have one more question here. We do. ChatGPT asks here on episode 5 from Feeling the Flow, how do you balance the goal of decentralization with the need for a smooth, responsive user experience? So this is a good question. So again, here the show obviously is, again, like I said before, this is part of the Near protocol. At Near Dev Hub, we are supporting developers in the Near ecosystem. So that is a big piece of the work that gets done here, is like talking about decentralization, things like that. This is purely my own opinion of how you start to balance this and where we are today versus where we're going in the future. I think today, you need to consider it, and you need to be thoughtful about decentralization and how much is actually controlled centrally. So I'm almost thinking of the opposite, like how much is actually controlled centrally, not focusing on like, can I decentralize this more, but like how much is actually being controlled centrally in your product. And does that cause different issues for what I'm doing? Am I worsening the user experience by doing so? So let's use the example that I actually used in a previous episode, not episode 5 here, where the question comes from, but actually in an earlier episode where we talked about, sometimes you can hide some of the stuff that's happening in the background through your user experience and through your user interface. This is something that I think is like a great way to still leverage what you need to leverage properly on chain. And hopefully, again, that stuff that's happening on chain is decentralized in a way that makes sense. And hopefully it's around like data storage or whatever might be a transaction. But you can kind of, like a magician, right? You can have like the user like look over here while this other thing is happening. And so the user doesn't feel if there is any lag. Now, I think there's a lot of options on chains that are a lot faster. Transactions are fast on Near, but sometimes it doesn't mean that you still might run into some things that make it feel a little bit slower. But, again, that comes down to like your RPC, how big of a transaction it actually is, what the transaction is actually doing, network congestion, there's all these different factors that go into it. So if you start to build and architect your app with that in mind, and you try to say, well, worst case scenario, like it's going to be, a 5-second load time. That's too long on a mobile app or any kind of app. So we need to do something different. So that's where you start to put things into motion separately. So that could be something like, I know that X outcome is going to happen. If it doesn't happen, I can always easily retry it for the user in the background. So we can do all of that, and then we can just take the user to the next stage, and now we're not caught up there. I'll also say that I think, part of the reason why a lot of people come to build on Web3 and crypto is around decentralization, around the openness of it, around like user controlled pieces of that. And so that is important. And that's part of the reason why I built here, right? So I do believe in that. But at the same time, like right now, we need to, as a larger ecosystem, I don't mean this as a near thing, I mean this as a larger crypto thing. Like we need to figure out more products that actually fit into, users' needs, and like things that users are going to use that are not just, DeFi and meme coins and NFT trading. It needs to be more real world type of stuff, and I don't mean like tokenizing real world assets. I mean like things that are people going to use in their everyday. And so if that means that you are not ready yet to fully decentralize parts of your app, I think that's a sacrifice worth making if you know that the app is going to, you hope the app is going to be successful. If you know that you can onboard more people by not being so caught up in the decentralization part of it, then that's, to me, it's like I need to focus on product first, and then the other stuff can come later. Now, like the large disclaimer here at the bottom would be like, hey, this could lead to technical debt, and this could lead to a part where like you are stuck not being able to actually decentralize what you want to decentralize until much later. But it's doable. You can always go back and you can do that. I will give the larger example that's more recent right now is like stuff like the Graph Protocol did. That's not really an app, it's not a product per se, I guess. It's like infrastructure, but their initial setup for some of their data querying and things like that was fairly centralized, and it was relying on the traditional kind of like Web 2 web service providers, and that was something that was good because it let people build quickly and let people kind of get going. But they wanted to get to a point of it being more decentralized, allow them to change the economics of everything if they were able to go into a more decentralized model. And so they did that later on. And they did that when they were in a spot that felt like it made a little bit more sense to do that. And so I don't know if it was right or wrong. I didn't work there, and I don't work with the Graph protocol really that much. So I don't know if it's really the right or wrong approach, but it's an approach, and it's the way you can go. And it seems to have gone well, and it seems to have worked for what they're trying to do. And so that's always there. That's always on the table to go back to that. But user acquisition and building a product that is going to have a life cycle that will allow you to get to the point of fully decentralizing it maybe, needs to start with something that is usable. And if your de facto based app is not usable, then I'm in a tough spot. And so that's how I would choose to break that down from there. Nice. Good questions today. So I hope that was helpful. We could certainly do more of these from some of these transcripts here. So if you missed the beginning of it, I love the concept of mailbags. I always want people to ask questions, being able to go back through those and taking episodes to do that. At episode 6, I figured we had 5 so far with a lot of content in them already, but I didn't have a lot of questions coming in from outside people. So I dumped all the transcripts into ChatGPT and Claude and had them ask questions about that stuff. So that's where those questions came from. If you haven't already, you can ask your own questions. You can also reach out to me always on social, but great place to do is to join the Telegram group. you're always welcome there. You can always ask questions, and especially if you're watching this on replay, that's a great place to go and ask some questions and follow up from there. We will continue to have more of these topics, and more stuff about building, where I think, is relevant to users today. So we definitely have some hackathon stuff coming up, talking about building there. So I want to highlight some of that. We definitely want to keep talking about, again, getting things out the door. We'll talk about some productivity hacks that I think are relevant to all developers, stuff like that. As always, if you have topics in mind, if you have something that you want to ask, if you have questions, I really encourage you to reach out and ask. If you haven't already claimed it, I would say, you can claim up here. Here you go, the QR code. That's for the ShardDog, and that's going to be useful later on. We're going to do some fun things with that. If you can't scan the QR code, it's this as well. I'll also want to remind everyone, if you're not following all the stuff on Near DevHub around our different socials, I would encourage you to do that as well, because we post a lot of great stuff there. We certainly have, and let me put this up too, the newsletter that comes out each week has everything you need to know about the ecosystem. And so definitely give this a look. Make sure you signed up for that, and stay in touch with what's going on here. All these replays are available on our YouTube channel if you want to check that out as well. And then from there, look, this is this time of year, things certainly kind of slow down a bit for a lot of people. But it's also a good opportunity to, think about that project you're working on, whether it's for your actual business, whether it's a hobby. Take some time and figure out, can I put some extra work into that? Can I ship stuff? Because that's the goal here, is got to get stuff out in the wild. Go from there. If you enjoyed this, please share it. Please subscribe to our little channels. I really appreciate that. Again, if you have something or you have questions, please, join that Telegram group. That's a great place for all of that. And all the information about our socials and everything else is all in there as well. And you can go from there. Until next week, please, again, ask those questions, but keep building, keep working, and let's see some good stuff out there. Enjoy your weekends. I'm signing off. Until then, take care.